So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House. We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie.
Okay, we go to something that's slightly more serious, and we have spoken about this recently, but we didn't get massively into this bit of this story.
What?
Is it true there is a movie in the pipeline based on The Witness? And how is Joey O'Callaghan getting on? Read the book in one day and I often think of him, which is actually indicative of how people react to that story, that sense of I often think of him.
Oh, definitely. Absolutely. And people contact me all the time. They've either read the book, they haven't been able to put it down, they feel so much empathy for him, for his story, or else they've listened to the podcast, which of course is in his own voice, which was a strange thing really, because Joey was on witness protection. No one out there knows what Joey looks like except a few of us. And that's amazing that, you know, you can record something in your voice and people will still not know it's...
Yeah,
I would have thought a voice was so distinctive, but...
Yeah, it can be distinctive, definitely, you know, but I suppose...
So the answer to that is yes, there is definitely a movie in the pipeline, which is extremely exciting. And it's been there, you know, the option for that book is gone a long time now. You know, what happens is if you write a book, a production company or somebody can come in and buy up the option, meaning that they can explore whether or not they can make a film or a documentary or whatever. Now, a film is such a huge endeavour. People think it's just the filming is the thing. But actually the run up to that, the trying to develop the script to make it
getting the
work
money as well,
in
course,
filming, and, you know, getting together the right people, the director, the, you know, scriptwriter, etc., producers. Sometimes they have to bring together a number of different production companies, and the money is the biggest thing, getting the funding. So you either go directly to one of the streamers and they will just pay for the whole thing, or else you have to go out and you have to raise the funds through different ways, through Screen Ireland, and I think there is funding for The Witness through that. And then you can bring in some partners and everybody will pay a percentage of it. But to make a movie costs so much money. It's unbelievable. I mean, you don't just do it, and it does take years and years and years to get there. But The Witness appears to have finally got here, because there has been recent auditions in Dublin held. Dublin is such a leaky bucket, you know. I actually am not massively privy to what's happening with this movie. I am in contact with the producers, obviously. And
just a question has sprung to my mind now. Is there a Nicola Talent character in the film? I wonder. Penelope Cruz, is she available? Or
I could not answer.
Could you not?
I could not answer.
No.
No, the story is the Witness is going to be based on Joey's on Joey's life, obviously, and what's happened to him with Brian Kenny and Thomas Hinchin. But basically, the auditions have definitely been held. But I was going to say to you, like, Dublin's such a leaky bucket that information isn't out there in the public arena. But I knew, because a number of people came to me who were either, you know, heard about it, or they were, you know, going to hope to try and go for auditions. So that's very far advanced.
Yeah.
You know, when they're choosing the people to play the roles. There's obviously going to be a Joey younger and older.
Yeah.
And there's Brian Kenny and there's Thomas Hinchin. And after that, there's various other characters, like certainly in the book, I don't know who they're going to, but it is going to be closely, the story is on the book, basically. So you had so many characters within that book.
And of course his own family as well.
His own family. His mother is a very significant person in his life. Obviously, his sisters. You know, when he was groomed by Kenny and went to live in that house, Kenny had a partner called Rita Harling who went on to write a book herself. He was at meetings as a young child, Joey, with Marlowe Hyland. That was the era. And was able to very articulately describe to me when I was doing the book about, you know, how scary Marlowe was.
Yeah.
and his presence in a room. And of course, he would have known the Bradley brothers, and a lot of people actually from that grouping had died.
Yeah.
There was at one point a kind of a story, or it was a kind of a story, that a rumor that went around that there had been this gypsy curse.
Yes.
Because a big group of, they were called the Filthy 50.
Yeah.
And they sort of were being hired out for robberies and for drug dealing and whatever. They were a kind of loosely held together group of freelancers, essentially. And there was supposed to have been this curse put on them, but an awful lot of them died. Now, it's nothing to do with a curse.
No.
It's to do with the kind of business they were in.
Exactly. And they were kind of young tearaways, really, that were maybe slightly younger than Marlowe Hyden, but were on the edges of that gang. And people like John Daly, of course.
Absolutely.
That would ultimately be shot.
And they were all characters really in Joey's life. And Joey's doing good. Somebody asked how is he doing? He's doing good. He's doing good. You know, life isn't easy for him, but he gets on with it and he enjoys it. And of course, we have done a podcast about Brian Kenny, because he is, of course, at the end of his life sentence and is now getting temporary release, which gives Joey O'Callaghan a lot of anxiety and, you know, triggers his mental health a lot, because in the end of the day, Brian Kenny has beef with Joey O'Callaghan and will do for the rest of his days. Joey O'Callaghan's evidence was part of what put Brian Kenny away for life in prison. And he's been in prison since 2004. A very long life sentence, you know.
It is.
22 years. And so he's getting this release at the weekends. He's kind of going to his own family in Drogheda in County Louth. Drogheda, isn't it? Tullyallen?
Tullyallen, which is
near enough to Drogheda. He's in Lockenhouse prison for the second time. And Joey would very much feel, and I've spoken to people who've been in prison with Brian Kenny, and people who have been in, you know, the vicinity of Brian Kenny. And every single person, no matter who they are, will describe Brian Kenny as a very sinister, dark character, very peculiar person. He doesn't have friends as such. And yet he tries to manipulate people everywhere. He tries to manipulate people in authority and tries to manipulate his contemporaries. And he's a kind of a sneaky sort of a character. I don't know whether I've ever come across anybody quite like Brian Kenny before within the gangland world, because most people, certainly that we encounter, and some of them might be particularly violent and all the rest of it, but they are largely, what you...
But they're victim of their circumstance for the most part. I mean, most
personality-wise, they're fairly straight up. I mean, you know what I mean? They have beef with you. Yeah. They want their way of handling that is they want to kill you or whatever. But it's fairly straight what they're at.
And they tend to have been sucked into it as, you know, teenagers, and they're in that life without knowing anything else. Brian Kenny is a bit of a different story in that he almost pursued it out of living a relatively normal life, coming from a normal background, and somehow managed to seek out that violent world, different than most people.
But I suppose in the end of the day, what an achievement for Joey O'Callaghan, really, when you think about it, for a guy that was plucked, his childhood was taken from him at the age of 11, 12, when Brian Kenny sort of tricked him and his family into giving him a job on a milk float, kind of an innocent thing that is maybe something in the past that kids used to do, but they did do it. They used to just travel around on the milk floats with the milkman and go and collect the money from people and deliver some bottles up to the doorsteps and that kind of thing. And for a guy who spent his teenage years being fed on a diet of cocaine, being schooled in the art of armed robbery, drug dealing, who had drugs strapped to him and was forced to travel across the city with, you know, on his motorbike with transporting, like he was a human courier for other people. A guy who was never paid for anything he did and was pretty much, you know, was in slavery to Brian Kenny. And a teenager who came out of that world, gave evidence against him and was branded a rat by his own community, had huge difficulty in the aftermath of that. What an achievement. A book, a podcast, and now a movie about his story. Like, it is quite phenomenal.
It is incredible. And I suppose that's actually can lead into our next question, because you can always look at that the work of the witness as something that somewhere in which you've tangibly helped improve somebody's life. But do some podcasts weigh you down mood-wise? If so, what ones?
Right. Yeah, well, some of them do, I have to say. I find, you going to answer that first?
Well, I'm
Sorry?
going to say the Jeffrey Epstein stuff is really, really dark, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, look, it's not a story that's centered in Ireland, but it just what it shows about human nature. Very, very sinister. I mean, we had another story this weekend to do with child sex abuse. A guy called Bill Keneally, who was a basketball coach, very well connected down in Waterford, a serial abuser of children. I mean, really, really, a huge number, and really damaged these people's lives. But there's something about how unrepentant that man is. I mean, I remember getting contact from him complaining, and we spoke about something similar with Jeffrey Epstein, where he was complaining that he wasn't a paedophile, that he was, merely a something else. These boys were post-pubescent, and, they, just so unrepentant. And because of the nature of that story, because there were so many, because there was this look at his political connections, it was a very well publicized story, and a lot of people came forward and they spoke openly about the absolute devastation that he had caused them. And just the fact that this guy is sitting in prison there, continuing during that inquiry to troll people, to be spoken to stand, didn't care. I think that's very dark. Those ones are dark, I think, sometimes.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, look, even when I was out in the road reporting, I'm sure you felt the same yourself. The hardest stories to do, really, and the people to approach were those paedophiles.
Yeah.
They were smart ass.
Yes.
They were totally unrepentant. They thought there was something wrong with you for asking the questions. They would lie blatantly, of course, and then they'd slip up. And I remember sitting in a house in a front room with a alleged paedophile, actually, and questioning him about some of his activities with children some years previous. He was a total hoarder.
Yeah.
Everything was filthy in the house. There was old cars sitting up in the driveway. Fabulous house now in a fabulous location, but there was magazines. There was, that hoarding thing is like. And he was speaking to me. Why? You know what I mean? Why was I in his sitting room? He had brought me in. He was playing a game in that he was denying everything, but he was sort of enjoying talking about it, actually.
Yeah.
And at one point, I think, I sort of, whatever way the conversation was going, this man had been accused of being part of a group of men who had sexually abused vulnerable kids in a particular community. And he at one point said to me about paedophilia, lots of people have that hobby.
Yeah.
And I went, you know what I mean? I kind of, it was one of those moments that I went, did I hear that properly? Yeah. Did he actually just say that? And of course it was being recorded. And I was like, did he just say hobby?
Yeah.
And I challenged him on that. And I said, a lot of people wouldn't call that a hobby.
Yeah.
And he sort of smiled and said, but a lot of people would.
Yeah.
And it was just disgusting. It was absolutely gross. I couldn't deal with those stories.
And of course, then the other thing about what you say about the ones that get you down, but I do find some of the speaking directly to people who've been victims of those crimes and have made recovery and have found the time to speak up. I do find them very life affirming, actually. We've both spoken to people in those circumstances many times on this podcast, people that have been victims of really serious crimes and their lives have been immeasurably changed. But there is something life affirming when you speak to them on a podcast, give them a long form to tell their stories. And, that's the other side of those dark stories, to hear people come through them. They come through them with great strength, and it is a public service for them to speak out.
Do you know what I find hard ones as well, hard going, and they do put me in a sort of a down mood, is the likes of the Hennessy's. Now, sort of the Hennessy's have been dismantled and they're in prison now, and there's maybe that gives the story an arc.
Yeah.
But the ones where it feels like a community is in a hopeless position because there's these people behaving in a way that is affecting everybody. And the law-abiding society, all our resources that we have, don't seem to be able to deal with them.
Yeah.
Now, they are slowly dealing with them and chipping away, and usually they are dismantled. But when they're operating and it goes on and on and on, and you keep coming back and talking about the story, and they're absolutely, they're firebombing the place, they're dragging kids into criminality, they're terrifying people. You speak to people that are living in these areas, and there's a sense of desperation about that.
There is.
And I find that kind of like that, weighs on me, because you feel as if, and also as a journalist, you have to talk about it in a way that you have to remain within our legal parameters, which are very strong libel laws. And there's loads of things you want to say. There's loads of things but you can't say them because you're not going to be able to broadcast if you do. And that's frustrating.
Yes, and certainly because we did a good bit about drug intimidation, and I've spoken to some people, totally ordinary members of the public, who phone me up, and because you're a journalist, they sort of seek advice. And I find that's difficult because they want to approach these people. They are probably willing, most of them are willing to do a deal and pay some money for usually what a son owes as a drug debt. And they say to you, will that sort it out? And should I do it or should I not do it? You probably shouldn't do it, but it's a very difficult position to be in, because those people have to live in that community. And where you could say you should go to the guards. The guards will do their best, but there's no perfect solution. So that is the depressing end of organised crime. I always think, when maybe it's because we are getting older, when you hear parents talking about kids sucked into that world, and the fear and terror and the sense of powerlessness. But also, it is important that also gives you a sort of a drive to do the job well, I suppose.
Exactly, yeah. Have we, a listener wants to know, any live shows coming up? Yes.
We do. Have you prepared for us?
No.
We are in the middle.
Okay, let me find that out. You talk there and I'll find out when it is.
We are in a preliminary planning mode for our live shows.
Cork Podcast Festival we're doing.
Yes.
Which is on the Friday 27th of March in the Cork Opera House. And tickets for that are corkpodcastfestival.ie. So we're just appearing as part of this podcast festival. Blind Boy is on as well, and others who I'm sure people can just go on and have a look at what is happening in the full lineup. But yeah, we're going to do a night, and we're going to concentrate on essentially the making of a cartel and the sort of international, it's almost Kinahan International, and some of the crazy, bizarre, totally unbelievable stories and business partners that have happened in the run-up to where we are today. So we're kind of delving into the bizarre, really.
Yeah, and the root and branch of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
The incredible reach of it, and incredible stuff.
But incredible stories that people will not have heard before, and tales from, where would you call them? The dark corners of the underworld, I suppose.
Absolutely.
So, and there's also another thing that you've forgotten we're doing, which is the Kilkenny
Law Festival.
Law Festival. Let me just see when that is on. That is happening. I don't know what our gig is with that as of yet, as in what time or date or anything we're on at, but that's happening on the first weekend of March, is it Friday the 6th of March to Sunday the 8th of March in Kilkenny. And again, KilkennyLawFestival.com is all the details of that. A few other little bits going on later in the year, but maybe that's, the most recent. Somebody else wants to know, are we coming to the north? Well, maybe.
Yeah, we haven't been there in a while.
You could certainly, there's so much, cross-border stuff. You could certainly bespoke a show that would really interest people in the north. But we're thinking about it. Shall we say that? We're thinking about it, yeah. Because we have been to Belfast a few times and have had a great reaction to the podcast, the live events, and we've just sort of taken a bit of a back seat with the last year. We need to kind of brush up again. You see, I did 2 years of the main shows, and then last year we really just attended the podcast festivals and did we did Electric Picnic and a few bits like that. And this year, look, it's early,
Early.
Still need to get the time.
Yes, exactly. And there are a good bit of work in it.
Yeah.
Well, I'll ask, we weren't going to get through the questions and answers without a Jerry Hutch question, were we? Do you think Jerry Hutch going down the political route puts a bigger target on his back? And that's an interesting question, because who is that question being asked about? Is it being asked about the Kinahans, about the police, or about the rival political parties, I suppose?
I think that put a bigger target on his back, yes, when it comes to the state and the Garda Síochána, because, you have somebody who is, who they say is part of an organised crime group, looking to make it in politics. They will absolutely 100% double down on efforts if they have anything on him. And we know there's investigations going on in this country in regard to corruption and other things. And it has been said before that Jerry Hutch is a target of that investigation. But he's also currently before the courts in Lanzarote, in Spain, where he is being investigated for money laundering. So I think a move into politics, or an attempted move into politics, most certainly would concentrate the mind of law enforcement on him, if there's anything for them to concentrate on.
Yeah, of course. And it's not that it necessarily amounts to a grand conspiracy where the Taoiseach rings up, with the commissioner and says, let's get this guy. But there's no doubt that Jared Hutch...
Well, that's not a massive conspiracy.
No, it's not.
But what a massive conspiracy would be if that conversation was, let's frame this guy.
Well, exactly.
But I mean, there's no doubt that the Taoiseach and the Garda Commissioner speak. And they're briefed,
of course,
the Taoiseach has been briefed on everything. And
the Taoiseach has spoken publicly about, about Jared Hutch. So it's an interesting case, I suppose. When he ran for election the last time, he didn't cause as much disquiet because he was certainly written off by the political watchers, and it was seen more as a novelty. But I've always said, I think if he chooses to run and all the indications are he will, it may draw a bit of attention on him. Whether it draws attention of the Kinahans, doesn't seem to be something that he's living in fear of. It has to be said, and it's always a bit mysterious. The level of threat is always very hard to assess, I suppose, but it doesn't seem to be a feature in his daily life at this point.
I would say that level of threat, the threat will always be there. And if I was certainly Jerry Hutch, which I'm not, I would always reflect on what happened to Gary Hutch, because Gary Hutch, a deal was done and he was given the sort of the carte blanche that he wasn't going to be killed, he wasn't going to be shot. He, as a very wily criminal, felt confident enough and trusting enough to go back out to Spain, right into the lion's den, and to believe that he could set up and operate on his own, independent of the Kinahans. And of course, he was shot dead. So that would always be something that, as the passage of time, it's easy to forget things. And that's really when somebody is maybe at their most vulnerable, I would say.
Yeah.
But again, there's no absolute suggestion or intelligence that there's something
in the planning.
But I think that bounty that was put on Jared Hutch's head at the height of the feud, which was said to be £1 million, million euro, whatever. I mean, I would have no reason to believe that that has actually been removed and that there wouldn't be enemies out there willing to take a pop at Gerard Hutch. Now, I imagine Gerard Hutch is, again, he's a wily criminal. I imagine he looks after his security and all the rest of it. But there was no guards in every corner when he was going round the last time as in his election. I don't know what security was in place, but he was going around the streets in a van and campaigning door to door and all the rest of it. That election campaign was somewhat unexpected. There's been a long run into this one, and I personally would be a little bit more careful if I was him, because, you know, this election, the by-election, hasn't yet even been announced.
No.
It could be April, May. There's been a long kind of run into this, and it pretty much has been confirmed he's running.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, time will tell if you know, but every election is different, and this election will be different than the last one for Gerard Hutch.
So we just here's maybe one of the last questions that we have for the moment is, can you cover more of the Flashy Gang? People love the Flashy Gang, don't they?
They do.
Why?
Well, I think there's one thing that you have to remember. We are old, right? So,
for yourself.
Well, the Flashy Gang, you know, you grew up with, probably the criminals that you first started reporting on will always be the ones that are most colourful to you.
Yes.
Or whatever. But the Flashy Gang were the next generation, really, I suppose. I suppose are they in their early 30s now? I think
well, he would be.
He would be, and the brother is a bit younger.
Yeah.
They made huge noise in a very brief time. And I suppose people that are in their late 20s, early 30s now, not only did they grow up with them in the papers, but they grew up with them openly on social media. Not just Glenn Ward, but all of the people around, you know, that had ties with him. And it was an incredible...
Like Scott Capper, who we were talking about recently.
Yeah, Scott Capper.
And he's still showing up on social media, you say?
He is. I saw some people trolling him on one of these sites recently.
Saying that he was dating...
Yeah, are we dating the same guy? And somebody had wrongly put it up, and all of his... and in fairness, it wasn't legitimate.
Yeah.
And all his family and friends saying, Scott, why are you saying this about Scott? He's a lovely guy.
He wasn't dating two girls.
No, I really don't think he was. So, but, you know, they became kind of, even away from the papers, these people, they lived their life out in social media. Scott Capper, obviously, but then, you know, obviously people like Halen Smith, for example. I mean, incredible stories about him. Do you remember he did the lie detector test?
Yes. I have a comment to make to you. Okay.
Go on.
If you don't want to alienate yourself from the young people...
Go on. Which I don't, if possible.
I think that you have to start referring to it as the media.
Oh, not the social media.
No. You say social media quite a lot, but you also say papers all the time. Papers. And when it's in the papers, it's in the papers.
I know.
The papers.
Well, this is... So you've now... Yeah. You've exposed me now.
I've exposed you there.
As a dinosaur. But you're right, I am a dinosaur. And because I would think, you have to be in the physical paper to be a known guy.
And there'll be people out there actually listening to this, because we know the age group of people listening to this who might wonder what is a paper. Because they probably haven't seen them in their homes growing up.
Yeah.
And that they have, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, you're right. I mean, you're right.
You
of
know?
Course, the world has changed.
So we're going to do a kind of a blooper with that now. Or, you know, every time you mention that.
You've never cut out any of my bloopers before. Why start now? But yeah. So that is, I think, why the fascination with them is, and they were colourful, and they rose and they fell really, really quickly. If you consider the life cycle of the Flashy Gang, and
they will, you know, emerge from prison still young and probably a little bit more mature and probably a little bit more dangerous and organised.
Yeah, but there are guys, even now, guys that we don't know yet, that we haven't heard named yet, that are already the new Mr. Flashies, probably.
We might find out.
But we haven't named.
We're not gone yet.
We haven't put them in the paper yet. Let's
We're
put
not
it that way.
I haven't put them in the paper. Well, God, and I actually have this thing I keep coming out with myself at the moment, and I tick myself off when I say it.
Well,
I keep saying things like, "Is he going to America?" I'm like, America? Who says America? It's like something from, the west of Ireland back 100 years ago when people went to America.
I said something, and where is it? Is it on the internet?
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I said that recently.
Yeah.
It just to sound.
Yeah,
of course.
The World Wide Web.
Yes. That World Wide Web.
The World Wide Web, which was such a dangerous thing. But no, I have to stop saying, I'm going to America. America?
Yeah.
Does anybody else say that?
I don't know. Or else just embrace it. Just.
You think?
Yeah.
Have it as one of my little quirks.
Yeah, one of your... Yeah.
One of my many.
One of your many quirks, yeah. One of your more harmless ones.
Well, listen, thank you everybody for all the questions. Keep them coming in, and our own social media.
Go on now, read out our email address.
No. People know it. They don't expect me to remember it.
Just get us on the internet or in the paper.
I was going to say our own social media platforms are all open. Our DMs are open, so send in anything you want to ask on
Maybe
those.
Not anything you want, but go on.
Well, no, because sometimes we can have a laugh here. It's an awful pity. I should actually do you know what I should do?
Go on.
A cameo, sort of a show.
Yeah.
With the questions that we couldn't ask.
Yeah.
The questions we couldn't read out, rather.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of them, and they're building.
Yes, they are building.
Yeah. And I have to say that you're getting quite a hit on them.
When I die, you can read them out. You can do my obituary. You can read them out, right? Okay.
When you die.
When I die.
Some of them are rather peculiar.
It's something to look forward to, Nick.
Rather peculiar. Anyway, over and out. If you're a crimeworld.com subscriber, you've probably already binged on our latest exclusive podcast series, The Regency 10 Years On, from the hit that changed gangland forever. This 6-part anniversary special revisits that fateful day when David Byrne was shot dead at the Northside Hotel, igniting a bloody feud between the Kinahan and Hutch gangs, one of the deadliest rivalries in Irish history. Here's a taste of the new series, exclusive to crimeworld.com subscribers. So that Friday was one of those really quiet days. I mean, we all knew that Daniel Kinahan was in Dublin for the Clash of the Clans boxing weigh-in. At least we knew he was due into Dublin the next day. That Clash of the Clans bout match had been heavily advertised. But the day itself there was just little going on.
So there was very little happening that day. It's February. It's kind of a quiet enough time for news in general. And Alan Cherry and Ernie Leslie were on the road. They were at another story actually in Finglas.
What was that, do you remember?
Well, it was one of these classic sort of district court stories where a guy had, I think some teenagers had thrown stones at his car and he got out and slapped the teenager. Always great kind of human stories because some people feel sorry for the teenagers and some people don't. And so Alan had been out there, but the guy had moved on. He'd called out to his house to see if he wanted to talk. He'd moved on, he wasn't there. And we discussed going to the Regency earlier. And I said, look, just go along and see what happens, divert there. We obviously weren't expecting anything. And obviously that point of Alan being there would be the subject of conspiracy, but we'll get into that at a later point.
For sure. So it was a case really that day of, one thing hadn't worked out, so go to the next. But also there was definitely a general sense of, if we could be there, just in case.
Yes, and as you said, to see who was standing beside the Kinahans and who wasn't from that bigger organised crime group. So Alan and Ernie went out. I got a call. I think you got a call almost simultaneously, but I got a call from Alan. I'd spoken to him earlier on the day saying, see what happens. And he phoned me up and said, there's after being a shooting and I think we've got a picture. And I actually went, yeah, very funny. But of course, he stopped me and said, no, I'm serious. We're after, there's some guys come out with a gun, there's shots fired and there's total and utter chaos. And, our first thought is, get yourself safe. I have to admit, my second thought was, I hope they did get good pictures. But, you're still thinking they have to get safe. I mean, I know you probably got a similar call because Ernie and Alan obviously were in the same Jeep.
And of course, Ernie's the guy taking the photographs,
Yes.
so he's on the phone to me. So I actually had gone for a pizza for lunch and I had come back over to the office and the phone rings and it was Ernie. And I answered and he was panicked on the other end of the phone. This was real high octane stuff. And he's still trying to take photos. He's trying to tell me what's happened. He's told me he thinks he's got a good one of one of the shooters as they were running from the scene. He was trying to call up the photograph on the back of his camera.
Yeah.
Because it would have taken him a while to get it onto a screen, but he'd also sent it into the office.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was kind of in the middle of doing a number of things. And as I was on the phone to him from memory, the photograph came into the office and we put it up on the big screen. And it was clear to see that this wasn't just one of the shooters as he suspected, but it was two. One of them was dressed as a woman.
Which is, of course, there was also this confusing story about guards coming in with weapons, and obviously we know now that they weren't ERU guys, they were guys dressed as them. But Alan was telling me this, there was talk of these guards, and then obviously there was, the crowd fleeing from the scene. So it was all confusing. But as you said, Ernie had taken a picture of the back of his camera. People will know what the photographer's cameras look like, and they have a little digital screen. So you don't see it in great detail, but we knew this is a once-in-a-lifetime photograph has been gotten.
Yeah, as soon as it came in. And of course, look, the newsrooms aren't as busy as they used to be. They used to be very busy, buzzy places with phones ringing everywhere. And it felt like a proper newsroom that day. I remember everybody's phone was going. People were hearing little bits about it. The news was starting to break about it. And of course, we were there sitting in the office with this photo. There's that sort of news sense in you that you want to run this.
Yeah.
And at the time, we weren't putting stuff up online. This would have been held for the paper on the Sunday. And this is a Friday afternoon. We had something really special here. But we also, I think, knew the guards were going to be desperate for that picture because they were two gunmen running from a scene of a crime. So it was a very compromised situation and there was a bit of arguments going on and there was voices were raised.
Totally. I mean, because it is complex. I mean, normally the journalism likes to keep itself separate from the Gardaí investigations. So Garda investigations go on and journalism reports on them. But obviously then you're put in this compromising position because you have guys running out visibly with handguns in their hands. And, they're obviously then disappeared into the ether. And you have to have a discussion about what is your civic responsibility in terms of, do you help the guards? You don't want these armed gunmen to run down the street and kill another few people. So it was a complex one, and people were aware straight away that the guards are going to want these pictures and want to use it for their purposes. And we also have our purposes, which is to tell what happened and to report on the news. So there was a conflict straight away.
From my memory, as the afternoon went on and I was talking to contacts and to other people who were involved in crime journalism, etc., it became apparent that there were no guards at the weigh-in. That in actual fact, the guards didn't seem to be there at all. They were called literally by the hotel and had arrived in response to what had already gone on. Of course, David Byrne had been shot dead in the reception of the hotel. We were getting photographs in later in the day, which showed a very shocked-looking Liam Byrne standing outside the hotel, his hands in his pockets, standing beside his cousin Liam Rowe, another significant cartel member. There was no sign of Daniel Kinahan. I was getting calls from people who were telling me that these professional killers had been flown into the country and had already been flown out. There was rumours, there was spin, and also there was the general, I suppose, conversations in regards to, oh my God, what is going to happen next? I mean, all anyone knew for sure was something was going to happen. David Byrne was a very, very senior lieutenant. He was also from criminal royalty, from the Byrne family. His brother-in-law is Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. You know, his brother is Liam Byrne, and he's very much at the heart of the Kinahan cartel. We knew from the beginning that this attack had occurred as part of the rivalry between the Kinahan and Hutch factions of what was once the one organisation. And I think everybody was really trying to predict what this might lead to, but nobody could have guessed.
Nobody could have guessed. And of course, those rumours straight away went around. It was straight away focused on the Hutch gang. But at this time, if you remember, while there had been other incidents, for example, an attempted hit on Jerry Hutch in Lanzarote, it wasn't, those incidents weren't always public. People were straight away thinking this isn't the type of normal organised crime operation. They were looking at the weapons, saying, is there a paramilitary organisation involved here? Nobody knew fully. And of course, what people did fear straight away was, no matter what, people knew how big and how powerful the Kinahans had become, and the likelihood of them not striking back was inevitable. That blood was going to flow.
That bit absolutely 100%. But at that very early stage, I recall contacts of mine suggesting that the Hutches were an army. Did they have the backing of the dissidents? Was this going to, were they going to be very heavily armed? Because of that, they had contacts in the north. It was like as if people were trying to size up how two Premiership teams were going to play against one another. That's what it felt like. You've been listening to an extract from the Regency, 10 years on from the hit that changed gangland forever. Visit crimeworld.com and subscribe to hear the full series now. And you'll also get exclusive access to our other podcast deep dives on the Dapper Don, Christy Kinahan, Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, and more.